Welcome back. You're still tuned in to Market View. This is the Monday edition. Last week, the Minister of Finance, Neil Rackenberg, tabled the quarterly report of the Ministry of Finance, and it revealed that the public debt stood at 34.54 billion emalangeni. We're now connecting with Sanele Spear, in-house economist. But before we get into that, let's start with this report. Government has collected over 1 billion emalangeni in taxes in the second quarter of this year, reflecting a 20% decline compared to the previous year. This is contained in the Ministry of Finance's quarterly report tabled in Parliament last week.
The quarterly report says preliminary debt figures show that as of 30 September this year, total public debt stood at 34.54 billion emalangeni, which is an equivalent of 39.79% of the country's gross domestic product. This is composed of domestic debt amounting to 19.18 billion emalangeni, which is equivalent to 22.60% of the gross domestic product, and external debt amounting to 15.36 billion emalangeni, which is equivalent to 17.70% of the GDP. Compared to the previous quarter, which stood at 33.96 billion emalangeni, total public debt has slightly increased by 581.80 million emalangeni. The report states that external debt slightly decreased from 16.10 billion emalangeni as of 30 June 2024 to 15.36 billion emalangeni as of 30 September this year. This can be attributed to a slight decrease in the implementation of capital projects as reflected in external disbursements, which amounted to 176.98 million emalangeni, and the slight appreciation of lilangeni against foreign currencies for the period under review compared to previous quarter ended 30th June 2024, which stood at 210.41 million emalangeni. The overall total disbursements indicate a decrease of about 33.343 million emalangeni from the previous quarter. The total revenue collected in the second quarter amounted to 6.003 billion emalangeni, reflecting 3% growth compared to the second quarter collection of 5.848 billion emalangeni in 2023-2024. The increase is attributed to the revenue growth in SACCO receipts, non-tax and taxes on goods and services. Total revenue portrays that 44% of the targeted annual revenue has been collected. The Minister of Finance says the exact amount collected in income taxes in the quarter amounted to 1.331 billion emalangeni, reflecting a 20% decline compared to 1.669 billion emalangeni collected in the prior year. The decline is mainly due to a decline in the collections from provisional taxes, pay-as-you-earn remittances, and other income tax. The overall income tax collection reflects a 38% of the annual target. For Market View, Nelson Langamandla, Vominkosi Nzinisa Mbabane.
Thank you for staying with us. We now connect with in-house economist Sanele Spear to unpack the Minister's quarterly finance report from the Ministry of Finance. A very good afternoon, Mr. Spear. Thank you for tuning in. Just focusing on the public debt, as at 30th September 2024, it stood at 34.54 billion emalangeni. How does it reflect on the Eswatini economy?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the viewers at home. So what we are seeing here is we can see that public debt actually increased slightly to 39.75% of GDP. So one could still say that we are still within, feasible parameters. So that means we've not yet exceeded the amount of borrowing that we should not exceed. So what this talks to is the fact that we do expect this external borrowing, because largely most of it is going towards financing of our capital projects. We should have hope that if all goes well, then we should expect to see that growth within the sector, and also we need to see that growth translating into tangible benefits for Eswatini. As we've been pointing out as they started, we do expect government expenditures to drive growth this year.
Yeah. So looking at the external debt, you know, the report also reveals that it decreased from 16.10 billion as at 30th June this year. What can this be attributed to? Could it be a slight decrease in the implementation of capital projects?
So what we are seeing there is two things, Lou. It's a combination of both, the slower implementation and also the exchange rate appreciation. As you know, most of our external debt is actually paid in US dollars. And ever since that GNU formation and moving into the current period, we've seen the exchange rate jumping from 19 against the dollar to around 17 point, I think it's 17.5 today, but it's been around that region, 17.2, 17.3, 17.4, and that actually benefits us as a country when we are paying our external debt, which is dollar based or dollar denominated, because then that means we need we need a little bit less of our emalangeni to pay the debt than we would actually require had we been required to pay it at that 19.5 type kind of region. So the exchange rate gains have actually assisted us a lot in this regard.
Yeah, and also just moving on to the total revenue collected in the second quarter, Mr. Spear, which amounted to 6 billion, reflecting 3% growth compared to second quarter collection of over 5 billion in Malangeni. Could the increase be also attributed to the revenue growth in SACU receipts?
Yes, a huge chunk of those of the revenues that we've collected just as yet just are as a result of the increase in SACCO receipts, and we got a bit more money from SACCO. But one interesting dynamic when you look into the numbers, you will see that in as much as we are collecting a lot and we are moving towards being a sustainable nation, SACCO receipts still contribute quite a huge chunk of government expenditures. So right now, if you look at all collected revenues, all collected revenue sources, you will see that SACCO accounts for about 66% of what we've collected to date, and that always puts us at a bit of a risky situation as a country because it's a volatile source. And then also when you look at the revenue collections, you can see, if you look at the numbers, you will see that overall we've collected right about 44% of overall revenues. And now that means we 6% in around we have a deficit of 6%. So it's those target misses that we usually worry about because they then have an implication on the cash flow of government, because when we budget, we expect the money to come in. So right now, if you've collected 44% of the money and you're already in quarter two, where we expect to have at least collected 50%, and we expect to have at least executed 50% of the government expenditures. So that tends to limit how much of a multiplier effect and how much of a growth effect we can have out of our government expenditures. So one would then probably caution to say, when we look into the way of running our expenditures as a government, we do need to improve our planning system so that we come up with cash flow projections that are a bit more realistic. Not to say the cash flows are not realistic. Yes, eventually we will raise the money, but it's a question of when do you raise the money, and you want to then tie your expenditures to that period. So what we require is that type of planning way, which is also going to take into consideration the cash flow situation, when the cash flow is going to come in, while we're also planning the expenditure. So now that would actually ensure that we are not working on the assumption that this money is going to come in quarter on quarter, and then our expenditures are also going to be quarter on quarter. So we need to be realistic in terms of timing our expenditures and timing our cash inflows. Because right now, if you look at the figures, if you look at the expenditures, one would think we are not burning as we ought to be burning. The money is not being spent as it ought to be spent. But one then should also caution that it's an issue of when they're coming and when we hope to have those expenditures.
Yeah, Mr. Spear, getting into the income taxes collected, the report reveals that in the quarter it amounted to 1.3 billion Malangeni, reflecting a 20% decline compared to 1.6 billion collected in the previous year. The report reveals that the decline is mainly due to poor collections of income taxes, provisional taxes, and also the pay-as-you-earn. How can this be resolved?
So this one is it's a bit of a hard pill to swallow because most income taxes, if you look at pay as you earn, for example, that one is collected by companies. So that means it's ideally supposed to be relatively easy to collect. So I would also probably argue that it speaks to issues of the performance of the economy. Probably the economy is not performing as well as we thought it should be performing. And you might find that businesses are having those struggles here, and then that's why it becomes a bit, they become a bit late in paying out those taxes. So what we need to do in that case is we would expect that the Revenue Authority should work hand in hand with businesses. And we know they changed the system. And when you talk to quite a number of people out there, they do raise challenges with the new system. So one would expect that we need to ensure that we do adequate taxpayer education so that we avoid these glitches, this minor test, those test runs. So going forward in the future, when a system changes, we need to have a dry run so that we know what the implications will be before phasing out the old system. Make sure that you keep it there and only just take a few of your taxpayers to the new system and then roll it out completely and fully when you've tested all the bugs and you are sure that people understand it and it's going to be easy for people to use the system.
All right, thank you, Mr. Spear, for that explanation. Further explanation. I'll see you in a few seconds. Mr. Spear comes back after the break for today's financial market.